Some stories sound so bizarre they're hard to wrap your head around, and this is definitely one of them. Meet Darren Hickey, a 51-year-old British wedding planner from Bolton, Lancashire, who was known for his big personality and even bigger heart. Not only was he a pro at planning dream weddings, but he was also deeply dedicated to charity. But Darren wasn't just about work. His incredible resilience made him an inspiration. 7 years earlier, he'd survived a massive stroke that left him with difficulty walking and speaking, but he didn't let that stop him. His determination earned him the Inspirational Person of Courage Award from the Stroke Association. You'd think after overcoming so much, Darren would have faced down just about anything. But no one could have predicted how a simple fish cake would change everything. It all started on April 4th, 2019, when Darren attended a wedding venue in Lancashire. At some point around noon, he sampled a small fish cake. Totally normal, right? But here's where things took a turn. That little bite of fish cake was scalding hot, and it burned the back of his throat. Now, we've all burnt our tongues on pizza or soup before, no big deal, and Darren thought the same. But as the day went on, that minor burn started feeling less minor. The pain grew worse, so Darren decided to get it checked out. He went to the urgent care ward at Chorley Hospital, where doctors assessed him and sent him home with paracetamol and the usual advice to come back if things got worse. Trusting the doctors, Darren went home to rest, assuming the worst was behind him. But the worst was just beginning. Over the next 12 hours, that burn turned into something far more dangerous than anyone could have expected. The swelling in Darren's throat increased rapidly, and by that evening his condition took a terrifying turn. His partner, Neil Parkinson, heard distressing noises and rushed to find Darren standing, choking and gasping for air. Neil tried desperately to help, and paramedics arrived quickly, but it was too late. Just after midnight, Darren was pronounced dead at Royal Bolton Hospital. A man who had survived a stroke and fought his way back to health was taken down by a single bite of hot fish cake. And if that's not chilling, I don't know what is. The inquest at Bolton Coroner's Court revealed the terrifying cause of Darren's death: extensive throat swelling leading to suffocation. And we're not talking a little irritation. The burn was so severe that it blocked his airway, depriving his body of oxygen. Pathologist Dr. Patrick W. explained that the burn was spot only visible with specialized equipment. He even compared the injury to burns seen in people who inhale smoke during house fires. And it all started with one small bite of hot fish cake. While these cases are incredibly rare, it makes you think twice about those times you've burnt your tongue on hot pizza, because sometimes what seems like a simple mistake can turn into something far more dangerous. The airport was alive with movement, a place where thousands passed through every day, their thoughts filled with the excitement of travel or the anticipation of returning home. Among the crowd were two young boys, drawn to the large monitors that displayed flight information. The screens, housed in a towering sign, flickered with numbers and destinations, an ordinary fixture in the bustling terminal. But what seemed like a harmless moment of curiosity would soon unravel into an unimaginable tragedy. A Transportation Security Administration officer had noticed the children moments before disaster struck. They were gripping the edges of the monitors, their small feet balanced on a metal bar that ran along the bottom of the structure. The sign stood tall and solid. At least, that was what everyone believed. Yet, beneath its sturdy appearance, danger lurked unnoticed. Time moved forward with an eerie inevitability. As the officer passed by, he considered intervening, warning them of the risks, but hesitated, expecting an adult nearby to step in. The boys continued to hold on, unaware of the unseen forces at play, the shifting balance, the mounting tension that would soon break. Then, in a sudden, gut-wrenching moment, the airport was rocked by a deafening crash. A metallic boom echoed through the terminal, shaking the floor as if an unseen force had struck from above. Travelers froze in place, their thoughts shifting from mundane concerns to an overwhelming sense of dread. The towering sign had fallen, trapping the children and their mother beneath its crushing weight. Screams filled the air, piercing through the terminal's usual hum. The TSA officer, who had only just stepped away, felt the impact reverberate through his feet. For a split second, he wondered if an explosion had gone off, but the sight before him told a different, horrifying story. Others rushed toward the fallen sign, struggling to lift it, their hands grasping at the heavy structure that had transformed from an ordinary fixture into an unyielding force of destruction. Amidst the chaos, emergency responders surged forward, their training kicking in as they assessed the scene. A woman lay injured, her body pinned beneath the wreckage, her cries of agony merging with the panicked voices around her. Beside her, two of her sons, once playful and full of life, were now trapped beneath the collapsed structure. The weight of the fallen sign had crushed their small frames, leaving onlookers frozen in helpless horror. A security officer at a nearby checkpoint watched the scene unfold through tear-filled eyes. A passenger he had been assisting moments before now stood trembling, her face streaked with tears. When he asked what had happened, her voice was barely more than a whisper as she recounted the horror she had just witnessed. The realization hit him with a cold, sinking finality. This was no ordinary accident. This was a moment that would leave scars, both visible and unseen, on all who had been present. Medical teams worked feverishly, their hands moving with practiced precision. They fought against time, against injury, against fate itself, but fate had already made its decision. One of the boys, Luke Brissett, did not survive. His mother and brothers, though still breathing, bore the physical and emotional wounds of a nightmarish moment that could never be undone. In the days that followed, the incident sent ripples through the airport community. The once overlooked sign, standing silent and unthreatening for years, had transformed into a symbol of tragedy. Investigators combed through the wreckage, searching for answers. How could something so routine, so unremarkable, turn deadly in an instant? Reports soon revealed the grim truth. The structure had not been secure, its weight far greater than its supports could handle. It had been a disaster waiting to happen, unnoticed by all until it was too late. The tragedy left behind more than just sorrow. It raised urgent questions about safety, about responsibility, about the hidden dangers lurking in everyday spaces. Conversations about structural integrity and airport safety took center stage, but for one grieving family, no amount of discussion could bring back what had been lost. Airports are places of movement, of beginnings and reunions, of goodbyes and new journeys. But on that day, in that moment, it became a place of heartbreak. The echoes of that crash, the weight of that moment, would never fully fade. And as travelers continued to pass through the terminal, glancing absent-mindedly at the screens above, few would ever know the tragic story hidden in the shadows of an otherwise ordinary place. All right, folks, buckle up because this story is equal parts bizarre and tragic, with a side of face-palm-worthy decisions. Picture this. It's Friday, January 12th, 2007, and a morning radio show called The Morning Rave on KDND decides to host an on-air contest with a prize everyone wanted back then, a Nintendo Wii. Yep, the hottest gaming console of the era, worth around $250. The name of the contest? Hold Your Wii for a Wii. And yes, it's just as ridiculous as it sounds. But hey, you gotta admire the straightforwardness. Here's the deal. Contestants had to drink as much water as possible without going to the bathroom. If you've ever been stuck on a long road trip with no rest stops, you know the struggle these people were about to face. But on paper, it seemed harmless enough until it wasn't. Enter Jennifer Strange, a devoted wife, loving mom of 3, and someone just trying to win a fun gaming system for her family. What could possibly go wrong, right? The contest kicked off at 6:15 a.m. with 18 eager participants, each handed an 8-ounce bottle of water to chug every 15 minutes. At first, it seemed like a breeze. These were small half-pint bottles, after all, but after just 90 minutes and 5 bottles in, the first contestant, James Ibarra, tapped out, his bladder waving the white flag. And that's when things started getting weird. A nurse, clearly more informed than the show's hosts, called in to warn them about the dangers of water intoxication. a real and potentially deadly condition where drinking too much water dilutes vital electrolytes, causing severe health issues. You'd think this would be a huge red flag, but nope, the hosts laughed it off. One even joked, "Is anyone dying in there?" Another quipped, "They signed releases, so we're not responsible." Yikes. Meanwhile, the contestants were kept in a separate room, oblivious to the nurse's warning. Jennifer, determined to win that Wii for her kids, kept going even as the pain set in. She complained about severe discomfort and splitting headaches, but the hosts were still joking around, showing a shocking lack of understanding. When one DJ asked if water poisoning was even a thing, another replied, "Not with water. Your body's 98% water. Why can't you take in as much as you want?" A third host even joked, "Maybe we should have researched this first. Ya think?" As the contest dragged on, the water bottles got bigger and the stakes higher. Jennifer pushed through nearly 2 gallons of water in just over 3 hours. Despite being in visible distress, she powered on, wanting to bring that Wii home for her 2 sons and daughter. When she finally bowed out, she was the second to last contestant standing, earning, wait for it, tickets to a Justin Timberlake concert. Not quite the prize she was aiming for, but things went from bad to catastrophic. Jennifer's stomach was painfully swollen, and she complained of excruciating headaches. Hoping some rest would help, she skipped work and went straight to bed. What she didn't know was that her body was already in crisis. Excessive water intake had diluted her blood sodium levels, causing water to flood into her cells. While most tissues can handle a little swelling, the brain, not so much. Encased in a rigid skull, her swelling brain had nowhere to go, leading to severe damage. Later that day, Jennifer called her workplace, crying and describing unbearable pain. Just 5 hours after the contest ended, her mother found her lifeless body at home. It's hard to imagine a more heartbreaking end to what was supposed to be a lighthearted event. The fallout was swift. The morning rave hosts, known on air as Trish, Maney, and Lucas, were fired the very next day. KDND canceled the show and terminated 10 employees in total. Jennifer's family sued the station, and on October 29, 2009, a California jury awarded them $16.5 million in damages. The station was held fully accountable for the reckless stunt that cost Jennifer her life. The night started like any other for a young couple in Tel Aviv, but it ended in a way no one could have imagined. Trapped in an underground elevator as floodwaters surged in, their final moments were spent battling for breath, desperately trying to escape as water filled the small space around them. Dean Shoshani and Stav Harari, both 25, had no idea they were stepping into a death trap when they entered the lift in their apartment building's underground parking garage. Heavy rain had been falling throughout the day, overwhelming the city's drainage systems and causing chaos on the streets. But the true nightmare began when the water found its way into the basement, seeping through an opening and quickly rising. As the elevator descended, an electrical failure suddenly caused the doors to lock. What should have been a quick and routine ride turned into a terrifying prison. Trapped inside, the couple struggled to force the doors open, but they wouldn't budge. Panic set in as the water levels rose around them. Neighbors could hear their desperate cries for help, but no one could get to them in time. Residents of the building immediately sprang into action, frantically calling emergency services. However, their pleas went unanswered for far too long. The city was already overwhelmed with flood-related emergencies, and their calls were either missed or dismissed. One tenant dialed for help repeatedly, only to be met with silence or disconnected calls. Time slipped away, and so did hope. The flooding intensified, and the underground parking garage became a deadly trap. The water had nowhere to go, pouring in rapidly, submerging everything in its path. The air inside the lift grew thinner as the couple fought to stay above the rising water. Their struggle could be heard, the sounds of their distress echoing through the basement. Then, just as suddenly, the noises stopped, silence fell, and with it came the realization that the worst had happened. By the time rescue crews finally arrived, it was too late. More than half an hour had passed, and every second had counted. Emergency personnel had to navigate the flooded parking lot with scuba gear, searching through the murky water for any sign of life. When they finally managed to pull the couple out, paramedics rushed them to the hospital, but the battle had already been lost. Dean and Stav were gone. In the aftermath, grief and anger swept through the community. The tragedy sparked outrage as questions surfaced about the building's infrastructure and the city's handling of the floods. Family members and neighbors pointed to years of poor maintenance, believing that the disaster could have been prevented if the building had better flood protection, if emergency services had responded faster, if the elevator had been designed differently. So many ifs haunted those left behind. Dean's family struggled to comprehend the loss, describing him as someone full of life, always looking beyond the ordinary. Stav, known for her kindness and warmth, left behind a grieving family unable to imagine a future without her. The pain of their absence cut deep, leaving wounds that would never truly heal. For the city, this tragedy became a chilling reminder of how quickly nature's fury could turn everyday places into death traps. It raised serious concerns about safety regulations, building codes, and the readiness of emergency responders. Many feared that if changes weren't made, another disaster like this could happen again. As days passed, tributes poured in, and the weight of what had happened settled over those who had tried to save them. The neighbors who had heard their cries, who had fought against locked doors and useless phone calls, would forever carry the memories of that fateful night. It was a tragedy that left scars not just on the families but on an entire community that had watched helplessly as 2 lives slipped away in the rising floodwaters. Sometimes, a seemingly harmless dare can take a dark turn, and that's exactly what happened to Sam Ballard. In 2010, the 19-year-old aspiring rugby player was enjoying a chill evening with his friends at the home of Jimmy Galvin, a buddy who, believe it or not, is now a famous pianist and music composer. The group was just hanging out, sipping on red wine and trying to act a bit grown up. But then, the night took an unexpected turn when a slug appeared on the concrete patio, and, as it often does with a bunch of teenage boys, a dare was born. So, what did they do? They dared Sam to eat the slug. A totally innocent, silly moment among friends, right? What could possibly go wrong? Well, what happened next would change Sam's life forever. He gulped down the slimy creature, thinking it was just a weird, gross challenge. But soon after, he began feeling incredibly weak, with his legs in pain. Then came the dizziness, followed by vomiting. His mother, Katie Ballard, initially thought the symptoms might be a sign of multiple sclerosis, a condition that had affected her husband. Multiple sclerosis can cause fatigue, dizziness, and weakness in the legs, and Sam had all of those symptoms. But doctors quickly ruled it out. It wasn't until Sam mentioned that he had eaten a slug that the puzzle pieces started to fall into place. Katie was skeptical. Who gets sick from eating a slug? But soon, Sam's diagnosis would prove much more terrifying. He had contracted a rare parasite known as rat lungworm disease. You might be wondering what on earth rat lungworm disease is. Well, here's the scoop. It's a disease caused by a parasite typically found in rats. The parasite gets into slugs when they consume rat feces that's contaminated with the parasite. When humans eat raw or undercooked slugs, the parasite can make its way into the brain, causing severe complications. And that's exactly what happened to Sam. The parasite made its way to his brain, causing inflammation in the membranes surrounding both the brain and spinal cord. Things went downhill fast, and Sam was soon in a coma, fighting for his life. Though most cases of rat lungworm disease are mild, Sam's case was catastrophic. He remained in a coma for about 13 months. When he woke up, he found himself in a completely different world, paralyzed and barely able to speak. His rugby dreams were shattered, and now he needed help to do even the simplest tasks. Despite this devastating new reality, Sam remained fully aware of everything around him. His friend Jimmy, who had been there when the dare went down, couldn't help but feel guilty. In an emotional moment, he apologized to Sam, with tears streaming down both their faces. Sam's mom, Katie, never blamed his friends for the dare. She knew it was just a reckless moment of youth. However, the weight of what followed would weigh heavily on her forever. She hoped, against all odds, that one day Sam might walk again, but deep down she knew his life could never go back to the way it was. In the final years of Sam's life, Katie fought tirelessly for her son's care, especially when Australian authorities cut disability funding. But despite her relentless efforts, the years of hardship wore on her. On November 2, 2018, Sam passed away at the age of 28 in Hornsby Hospital, just a short distance from where he grew up. In his final moments surrounded by his loved ones, Sam managed to say the words Katie had been longing to hear, "I love you." It was the last thing he ever said before taking his final breath, a sad reminder of how one dare changed everything. The Hayride had started as a night of fun, a simple outing under the cool autumn sky. Families and friends gathered near Nauvoo, Illinois, ready to enjoy a peaceful ride through the countryside. Sitting on hay bales in a double-axle trailer pulled by a John Deere tractor, they had no idea that their evening would take a devastating turn. As the tractor made its way along the gravel path, the driver suddenly lost control. The trailer veered off to the side, tipping dangerously before crashing into a wooded ravine. Panic spread instantly as passengers were thrown from their seats, some landing hard on the rough terrain below. The peaceful night had turned into a scene of chaos. Emergency crews rushed to the area, their sirens breaking through the darkness. Medics worked quickly, assessing injuries and doing their best to help those in need. A total of 17 people were hurt, including 15 children, some as young as 1-year-old. Tragically, a 32-year-old woman lost her life in the accident. Her name was not released, but her absence left a painful void for those who had been with her that night. An investigation into the crash began immediately. Authorities discovered that the tractor was too small to safely pull such a heavy trailer, making it difficult to control, especially on an incline. The driver, identified as Wayne York, was held responsible for failing to adjust his speed to avoid an accident. The soft, rain-soaked ground along the roadside only made things worse, creating a slippery path that made the trailer even harder to manage. For residents of Nauvoo, the accident was a shocking and heartbreaking event. This quiet community was known for its friendly gatherings, especially during the fall season. Every year, families and visitors would come together for the town's Halloween pumpkin walk, a tradition that filled the streets with glowing jack-o'-lanterns and festive decorations. Although this year's event had been canceled, some people still came to celebrate, eager to hold on to a sense of normalcy. In the aftermath of the tragedy, discussions about Hayride safety grew louder. Some residents recalled similar accidents in the past, realizing that nighttime hayrides could be more dangerous than they seemed. The peaceful image of a slow-moving tractor pulling a wagon full of passengers often masked the real risks involved. As the town grieved, many began to rethink whether these beloved traditions were as safe as they had once believed. Despite the sorrow, the community came together to support those affected by the accident. Families comforted one another, offering help in any way they could. The memory of that fateful night would not fade quickly, but the lessons it left behind would shape future decisions. Moving forward, safety measures would be a top priority to prevent another tragedy like this from happening again. As the investigation wrapped up and people tried to heal, one thing remained clear. Even the most ordinary, enjoyable activities could sometimes hold unexpected dangers. The tragedy of that night would serve as a lasting reminder to always put safety first, ensuring that future hayrides would be remembered for laughter and joy rather than heartbreak. Ever wonder if we're really ready to hand over the steering wheel to artificial intelligence? Well, this next story might make you pump the brakes on that idea. On a quiet night in Tempe, Arizona, on March 18, 2018, a groundbreaking experiment in self-driving tech went horribly wrong. Elaine Hertzberg, a 49-year-old woman, was wheeling her bicycle across the road when she crossed paths with an Uber vehicle traveling at 40 miles per hour. Sounds like the setup for a bad movie, right? Except this was real life, and it turned tragic fast. The Volvo SUV, tricked out with Uber's autonomous driving system, was in self-driving mode with Rafaela Vasquez, a safety driver behind the wheel. Her job? Keep an eye on the car and step in if things went haywire. Spoiler alert, things did go haywire. Here's where it gets even messier. It turns out that Rafaela was distracted, and not just, I glanced at my phone, distracted. She was streaming an episode of The Voice on her phone, yes, really, at the exact moment she was supposed to be monitoring a self-driving car. She looked down at her lap for over 5 seconds and looked up less than a second before the impact. By then, it was way too late. Meanwhile, Uber's AI brain was having an existential crisis, struggling to figure out what a lane was, a vehicle, a bicycle, an other object. Because she wasn't near a crosswalk, the system failed to predict her path, and when the car finally decided to hit the brakes, it was 1.3 seconds before the crash. Way too late to avoid tragedy. To make things worse, Uber had disabled the car's emergency braking system, putting all the responsibility on the safety driver, who, as we now know, was busy watching TV. The fallout was swift and brutal. This was the first pedestrian fatality involving a self-driving car, and the National Transportation Safety Board's investigation exposed some terrifying oversights. First, Uber's autonomous system didn't recognize jaywalkers, a huge blind spot given how often people cross outside designated areas. Second, there was insufficient training and zero oversight of safety drivers. Rafaela was working alone and distracted for most of her shift, a recipe for disaster. Third, Uber's system didn't alert safety drivers in emergencies, which meant there was no warning when things went wrong. And finally, Uber's Advanced Technologies Group had no formal safety plan, no standardized procedures, and no dedicated safety manager. Basically, they were winging it with self-driving cars. Unsurprisingly, the backlash was intense. Uber's self-driving car program in Arizona was suspended, and Rafaela faced legal consequences. She was sentenced to 3 years of supervised probation, with the charge downgraded to a misdemeanor if she completed her sentence successfully. While she bore some responsibility, the court also pointed to Uber's shocking lack of safety measures as a major contributing factor. After the accident, Uber updated its software to finally recognize jaywalkers, something you'd think would have been a basic feature from the start. So, the next time you hear someone say, "Self-driving cars are the future," maybe take a moment to wonder, are we really ready? The night had begun like any other, quiet and uneventful. Jane MacDonald, 31, had gone to visit a friend in Airdrie, Lanarkshire, unaware that a tragic accident would soon unfold. While in the kitchen, she slipped, and in a terrible twist of fate, she fell onto a knife that had been left standing upright in the dishwasher. In an instant, an ordinary evening turned into a frantic emergency. The piercing sound of sirens shattered the silence as paramedics rushed to the scene. They worked quickly, doing everything they could before speeding Jane to Monkland's General Hospital. But despite their best efforts, she did not survive. The shocking accident left the neighborhood in disbelief. Strathclyde police confirmed that there was no foul play, just a devastating accident that no one could have foreseen. Officers remained at the scene, their presence a painful reminder of the night's tragedy. The house where the accident occurred belonged to Reverend Sharon Colvin, a Church of Scotland minister. She had yet to speak publicly about the incident, but those who knew her could only imagine the weight of sorrow she carried. Robert Hutton, a former church session clerk, explained that Jane had simply been a guest, caught in an unforeseen and heartbreaking turn of events. Friends and neighbors struggled to process the devastating news, unable to comprehend how such a simple household mishap could have such fatal consequences. The usually quiet cul-de-sac had never witnessed such chaos. Curious neighbors peered through their windows, watching as the flashing emergency lights cast eerie shadows on the pavement. One resident recalled seeing 4 or 5 medics rush into the house, their faces tense with urgency. They did all they could, but the woman they wheeled out in the ambulance never came back. Some onlookers murmured among themselves, wondering if anything could have been done differently to prevent such an accident. Tragically, this was not an isolated incident. 6 years earlier, a 12-year-old boy in Northampton had lost his life in a similar way. a stark reminder of the hidden dangers within everyday household routines. Even the most mundane objects, when left in the wrong position, could turn deadly in a split second. Safety experts stressed that such accidents, while rare, were not unheard of. They urged people to take extra precautions, emphasizing the importance of even the smallest safety measures in the home. Following Jane's untimely death, the Royal Society for the Prevention of Accidents, ROSPA, issued an urgent warning. If possible, always place knives with the blade facing downward in the dishwasher, a spokesperson advised. Even though some manufacturers suggest otherwise, safety should always come first. Experts pointed out that while dishwashers were a standard household appliance, they could still pose risks if not used carefully. A simple adjustment in how utensils were placed could mean the difference between safety and tragedy. It was a minor precaution, something easily overlooked. Yet, one simple oversight had resulted in a heartbreaking loss. Experts urged people to be more mindful, to take even the smallest safety measures seriously, and to remember that even routine tasks could carry unexpected risks. These reminders resonated deeply with many who heard Jane's story, as they reevaluated their own household habits and whether they were unknowingly putting themselves or their loved ones at risk. Jane's family and friends were left in shock and grief. She had been full of life, yet in a single moment everything had changed. Reverend Colvin, who had so kindly opened her home to Jane, now found herself mourning a devastating loss. We've all got our guilty pleasures, hot chocolate, Netflix binges, maybe a little too much coffee, but for Natasha Harris, a 30-year-old mother of 8 from Invercargill, New Zealand, her guilty pleasure turned into a deadly obsession. Her love for Coca-Cola wasn't your typical, I need a soda with my burger kind of thing. We're talking 2 gallons of Coke every single day. From the moment she woke up to the moment she went to bed, she was never far from a glass of the fizzy stuff. And it wasn't just a craving, it was a full-blown addiction. Without her usual supply, Natasha would experience withdrawal symptoms like shaking, irritability, and restlessness. But because there were no warning labels on the bottles, her family never thought this everyday beverage could be dangerous, even as her health started to fall apart. For about 6 months before her death, Natasha's health took a serious hit. She was constantly exhausted, often nauseous and frequently vomiting in the mornings. Despite feeling extreme fatigue and a racing heartbeat, she avoided seeing doctors due to a deep fear of them. To make matters worse, her lifestyle wasn't helping. She barely ate, only having a small lunch most days, and smoked around 30 cigarettes daily. Her soda addiction even affected her teeth. They rotted so badly they had to be removed, and some of her kids were born without enamel on their teeth, likely due to her excessive soda consumption during pregnancy. And if you're wondering just how much caffeine she was putting into her system, brace yourself. A single ounce of Coke contains 2.3 milligrams of caffeine, and with Natasha consuming between 2.1 and 2.6 gallons daily, she was taking in around 800 milligrams of caffeine a day, double the safe limit for an average adult. Combine that with her poor diet and smoking habits, and her body was running on empty. On the morning of February 25, 2010, Natasha's routine started as usual, getting her kids ready for school and having her morning Coke fix. But shortly after, everything changed. She collapsed against a wall in the bathroom, struggling to breathe. Her partner, Christopher Hodkinson, called emergency services and tried desperately to revive her with CPR, but despite his efforts, Natasha passed away at home. The inquest into her death revealed cardiac arrhythmia, an irregular heartbeat, as the primary cause of death. But it didn't stop there. Doctors also suspected severe hypokalemia, a dangerous condition where potassium levels in the blood drop too low, likely due to her soda addiction. Potassium is crucial for proper muscle and nerve function, including keeping your heart beating normally. When you overload on caffeine and sugar, they drive potassium into your cells and out of your bloodstream, leaving dangerously low levels where it matters most. In the aftermath, Christopher blamed Coca-Cola for Natasha's death. believing the company should take responsibility for the health risks associated with excessive consumption of their product. But Coca-Cola denied direct responsibility, arguing that while cardiac arrhythmia was the official cause of death, there was no definitive proof that Coke alone was to blame. Still, experts pointed out the sheer volume of liquid Natasha consumed daily, 338 ounces a day, would strain anyone's body, regardless of the beverage. And let's not forget the 4,000 calories she was drinking every day just from Coke, almost double the recommended daily intake. While most people who enjoy soda in moderation don't need to worry, Natasha's story serves as a sobering reminder that even something as ordinary as a soft drink can turn deadly when taken to extremes. So maybe next time you reach for that extra can of Coke, you'll think twice, because no one wants their love of soda to take a dark and dangerous turn. What started as a seemingly harmless decoration became the scene of a tragic and baffling incident. In a quiet suburb of Barcelona, a man lost his life in the most unexpected of places, inside the hollow leg of a massive dinosaur statue. The discovery came on an otherwise ordinary afternoon when a father and son happened to glance inside the towering Stegosaurus. What they saw was unsettling. Something was lodged deep within the structure, something that didn't belong. Alarmed, they quickly called for help. Authorities arrived and soon confirmed the unthinkable. There was a body trapped inside the statue. The victim was a 40-year-old man who had been reported missing just hours earlier. His family had been searching for him, unaware that he was in a place so improbable that no one would have thought to look. Investigators pieced together a chilling theory of what might have happened. They suspected that the man had dropped his phone inside the statue and, in an effort to retrieve it, had crawled headfirst into the narrow opening. But once inside, something went terribly wrong. He became stuck, unable to move, unable to call for help. For hours, perhaps even days, he remained trapped, his fate sealed by an unfortunate accident. The dinosaur, which once stood as nothing more than a quirky decoration outside an abandoned cinema, had unwittingly become a tomb. Firefighters worked carefully to free his body, cutting through the statue's structure to extract him, but it was too late. There was nothing that could be done. Police ruled out foul play, stating that there were no signs of violence. This was a tragic accident, a bizarre twist of fate that had left an entire community in shock. No one could comprehend how such an ordinary object could become the setting for such a heartbreaking event. Questions still lingered. How had the man managed to enter the statue in the first place? Why had no one heard his cries for help? And just how long had he been trapped inside before he was found? The autopsy would provide more details, but for now, all that remained was a haunting sense of mystery. As news of the incident spread, the town was left shaken. The once familiar dinosaur, which had stood as a whimsical landmark for years, had now become a grim reminder of life's unpredictability. What had once brought joy and nostalgia now cast a shadow of sorrow. Though officials assured the public that it was a case of misfortune rather than negligence, the tragedy left many wondering how something so simple could have turned into something so tragic. The statue, once a harmless piece of decoration, would never be seen the same way again. As time passed, the story of the man and the dinosaur would become one of those eerie tales that lingered in whispered conversations, a warning of how quickly the ordinary can turn into the unimaginable.